Good afternoon. Can we start? Vice Chancellor, Professor Chris Nhlapo, Executive Management, our esteemed guest, Speaker Ms. Chantal Ilbery, Deans, Assistant Deans, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Goeiemiddag. Molweni. My name is Paul Green, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Business and Management Sciences. And I'm honored this afternoon to be your program director for this event, which speaks to our university's strategic plan and which has been aptly coined the title, The Journey to Vision 2030, Navigating Obstacles, Scenario Planning for Vision 2030. So before we commence, allow me as your program director just to mention some very brief housekeeping rules. For those of you that have attended this auditorium for the first time, our bathrooms are to the back of the auditorium. And ladies and gentlemen, please may I respectfully request that if you have your cell phones, if you could turn it on to silent at this point in time. With regards to COVID, I think it'll be necessary for me just to repeat to say, as an audience this afternoon, it is absolutely critical that we continue to exercise caution. So having said that, and without any further ado, allow me to invite to the podium this afternoon Professor Driekie Huyswemer, who is the Executive Director in the Office of the Vice Chancellor, to do the official welcome as well as to introduce our Vice Chancellor, Professor Chris Nhlapo. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the podium Professor Driekie Huyswemer.
Good afternoon, colleagues. When I was walking somewhere today on campus, one of the students asked me, so when are you going to retire? And this is all because of this crutch that I have to use. So it's still me, just to put you at ease. Dear Vice Chancellor, our guest speaker, Ms. Chantal Ilbery, our DVCs here, Prof. Balkran, Prof. Mayende, I don't see him here, but I know maybe he's watching from somewhere else. Dr. Pau, deans, directors, what an exciting moment is this. I must say, I didn't do the whole journey with Vision 2030. It was a bit before my time, but I remember since day one, when I started to work here, it was already on the lips of every person here. And Vice Chancellor, I remember one day you said, you don't think this is really going to happen? And we did. There was sort of a transitional phase where the person who started this journey retired, and then I had to see it through, and there was a deadline to get it through council by November 2020. So that in itself, for me, was a wonderful experience to get to the heart of CPUT and to be able to understand the dreams, the plans that they had for this university. So it's my pleasure and honor to just say a few words about Prof. Chris Nhlapo. In the program, you can read about his CV, and I think most of you know his CV quite well. For those of you maybe do not know, Prof. Chris is a very seasoned higher education manager. He has been on executive level, I think, Prof, for almost 15 years without a sabbatical. And I'm always fighting with him because I believe it's just good to have a break somewhere in between. But nonetheless, he has big admiration throughout the country for his role also in USAF. So I'm not going to focus that much on his career history, but maybe say something different this afternoon. At the moment, he's also involved in a number ministerial task teams where he's playing a pivotal role in influencing strategic plans and also policies. Now, I think something else that maybe not all of you know, which I would love to share with you, is the fact that Prof. Chris, he was born in a little town in the Free State called Paulroux. I don't know whether all of you know where that is. It's somewhere between Senekal and Bethlehem towards the eastern Free State. Very cold place. Now, why I'm mentioning this? Because I've also spent a couple of years in the eastern Free State, and I remember how cold I was in winter. But the beauty for me is, and why I'm mentioning it here this afternoon, is that that little town grounded a future professor and a vice-chancellor. And during that time, in this little town, and he loves to tell stories about how he went to school. And he has this love for maths and chemistry and so forth, and also for the ground and the soil, and how he would count everything he saw it basically in numbers. And for him, no challenge was ever too big to overcome and to be the vice-chancellor that we have today. And what do we see from those grounded years in the Free State? We see his character in the form of someone being very humble, known for his honesty, consistency, principle-led leader he is indeed, and agile and a thought leader. I think we can be so proud to have such a vice-chancellor who in this time and point also of our country's history is a man that stands up for what is right and what is ethic. And for that, I must say, I'm so grateful to work in the office of the Vice-Chancellor. But back to why we're here this afternoon. Certainly, it would not have happened without the vision and the strategic thinking of Professor Chris Nhlapo. He had this vision to become the UOT in South Africa, the MIT in Africa, and to be one smart university with the emphasis on smartness. It was indeed quite an ambitious, maybe, would some people say, dream. But what we see today here and what you will see is that dreams can come true. And I think rightfully so, we can actually, one day when Prof. Chris maybe retire from CPUT and he walks with a crutch, then we can say he was the father of Vision 2030. He was the architect who brought change into CPUT and actually re-engineered the destiny of CPUT. Vice-Chancellor, it's my honor to call you to the podium for your keynote address, and we thank you for your vision and that you are indeed a strategist when it comes to where you want to go with the institution and also how to get there. Please, colleagues, welcome Prof. Chris Nhlapo to the podium. Thank you.
Colleagues, I have scribbled some notes for me to share with you. And thanks, Professor Heiswemer, for a very kind introduction. I will not get into the Paulroux story. It's a discussion for another day. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Molweni. Molweni mawethu. Ninjani. Sikhona. Goeiemiddag dames en heren. Baie dankie. Baie dankie dames en heren vir die groot geleentheid om enkel gedagtes met u te wissel. Dit is vir my 'n groot voorreg. Program Director, Professor Green, distinguished guests, especially Ms. Chantal Elberry. We are honored to have you here in our midst. I was sharing with you some of your works that I like, and I've been saying to colleagues, coming from the hinterland, I can relate to foxes and squirrel. Squirrel in terms of indecisiveness, and of course the fox in terms of having so many ideas, but not mastering any. So I can very well relate coming from the hinterland. Members of the executive management here present, colloquially referred to as our EM, our staff and students of CPUT, all protocols observed. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to relay dates of epoch-making events at CPUT, as well as the turning points in the CPUT's history. Before coming to CPUT Vision 2030, I normally talk about CPUT 1.0, which is the very first version, that after the merger in 2005, we were actually working on standard institutional statutes. And there were a lot of major issues, or the so-called major blues, that our people were going through, and emotions as well. That took a long time. And it delayed us, even though on paper we were merged institutions. But in terms of people's issues, there were a lot of issues. Some people, because now you had 2 deans for 1 faculty, you have to pick up which dean that you have to take. And there were a lot of people who were disgruntled that, you know what, but it looks like they are favoring only the Pentec and not the Cape Tech. There were a lot of issues that people were unhappy with when I arrived here. Then, of course, this Cape Technicon has its roots in the Cape Technical College. And then, of course, we had the Peninsula Technicon, which has its roots in the Peninsula Technical College. So we merged the two, and of course, come the 1st of January 2005, we were having what is called the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. What I always say to people that it is not CPUT, it is CPUT. Sometimes I tend to bother people, but it's important that people must actually know that we are talking about a C as in the ocean, a P as the one that you grow, and U as in you, and a T as the one that you are drinking. Because we wanted to run away from names such as kaput or siput. We rejected that right from the onset, that we are not kaput. Then, of course, around 2010, we coined a vision, Vision 2020, which, of course, at that time, people were so infatuated with callings. And there were a lot of, at executive management, at council, people were buying volumes and volumes of Collins work. If you remember How the Mighty Fall, that's Collins. Good to Great, that's the Collins. Build to Last, that's Collins. I still have those piles. And I've read them cover to cover. But there was nothing wrong with that because he's actually a great strategist, Collins. And then at that point, we're actually talking about, we wanted to move CPUT from good to great. If in the interview a person is not touching their transition, how are you going to move us from a good institution to a great institution? Because good is the enemy of great. They cannot be together. That was actually the discussion. And of course, that was actually some of the essence of Vision 2020, where of course we also coined or crafted what is called the RTI blueprint. And of course, we took a declaration being aware of our challenges as a University of Technology, young, and of course, coming from the technical background to say, maybe we need to commit ourselves as far as research is concerned. And that was actually the birth of what is commonly called the Platted Kloof Declaration, where all the deans and everybody else in Platted Kloof, we said we are going to ensure that in our budgets, in our recruitment, we are going to ensure that we grow within the institution. We are also going to ensure that we are bringing the right people at the institution to ensure that we grow fast. And that happened. The rest is history today. Then, of course, colleagues, that the other version that we are talking about is the current version, Vision 2030. And of course, February 2022, what I call CPUT 3.0, the third iteration, we actually have statutes gazetted. We are busy now with the constitution of council. And of course, we are going to move forward with a new council, properly constituted, a much trimmer council that is going to take us through to the next level. In fact, they're going to be part and parcel of Vision 2030. And of course, we also look at the whole question of the thematic areas in research as to where we can participate and which areas that we think we can punch way above our weight. That was actually now the 6 focus areas as far as research is concerned. But allow me, now that I've given you a brief history, to talk to you about the gestation of One Smart CPUT. On the 14th of September 2017, I was actually asked by the council of the time to come up with a topic for the inauguration of the Chancellor, the Honorable Thandi Modise. And what I propose with the then registrar said, let's predicate the presentation of the Chancellor on this concept of the fourth industrial revolution. It was still brand new. People were raving about it based on the discussion that was taking place at the World Economic Forum, because that was going to be the next battle when it comes to the revolution as far as the economic development is concerned. And then, of course, we predicated the presentation of the Chancellor or the Chancellor-elect on the fourth industrial revolution, the challenges posed by the fourth industrial revolution, as well as digital revolution and the global economy at the time, how humans interact and relate to the world. And we talk about the digital revolution that has blurred the lines between the physical and biological, between the real and the virtual, which, of course, is going to impact the world of work. And, of course, the Chancellor was also very happy about this particular topic, and she presented well. And then, of course, come November 2017, we had a meeting, the so-called ISPC, at the Hotel Velde, and that's where the idea of One Smart CPUT was conceived. We agreed at that ISPC of November 2017 that CPUT need to reimagine itself and claim its space as a leading investor of technology in South Africa and on the African continent, and indeed the globe. This vision was influenced by the hype again of Society 5.0, as well as the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the whole question of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, augmented reality, and the explosion of educational technological developments and opportunities. We said there is no better place than CPUT, given the fact that in our DNA, we are investors of technology. This seemed to be speaking to us as an institution that we can grab this opportunity and come up with something very unique. When you talk to other people, they normally say, you know, this one smart CPUT, it's catchy. Some people are saying, you know what, it's something that I think one of the candidates in the interview say it's funky. But it's much more than that. It's actually very deep. Smart universities are emerging universities, and of course, we know by now that the coronavirus or the COVID-19 accelerated this particular aspect. And I've had now a number of fellow vice-chancellors. They are not talking about the smart university, smart that. But it's important to note that we did that first. And then come 4th December 2018, I had a meeting. I called all the past vice-chancellors and the DVCs. Some of them were here in Crutches, Professor Heiswemer. They are old. And I said, but let's talk about your vision for this institution, because I wanted to use you as a reservoir for wisdom. And all of them were here, even the late Professor Baluntulo. He came all the way from Kantani in the Western Cape. He was actually here. And we had a lot of discussion about the views that I have about this institution. And I must actually say that in our engagement, they were actually saying, this is the dream that we want. We have been thinking about this. In fact, if you look at a number of our staff, they train at universities like MIT. And in fact, we wanted to be the MIT of Africa. The history of the buildings, the architecture as it is, I can tell you a story, but it's a story for another day. How they came up with this particular architecture of the institution. But the long and short of it is that they were really supportive of the views that we're actually having around creating something that is combining both the hands and the mind together, being a university of technology, because that is what is ingrained in our DNA, that we are playing in the applied space, and of course, we are making impact as far as society is concerned. And then, of course, on the 25th of March 2019, if we fast forward, we had a staff meeting, the so-called welcome, as far as staff is concerned. And we engaged, and we said to our staff that it is important, given the result that we've had as far as Vision 2020 is concerned, which were concerning, because the results were saying we are doing fantastic in terms of the technology, in terms of our PQM, but we seem to have neglected the human aspect. And the survey as well also said the environment at CPUT is toxic because you are actually pushing this technology. Your graduates are very, very good, but recall that these graduates are going to work with people. So it may actually help that some of the electives must actually be coming from humanities. And it's important that we look at the question of transdisciplinarity, because your people should actually understand even at least South African history. And then we coined a presentation at the stadium at the time, listen, engage, and commit. And what we're doing there, we're indeed listening to our people, we're engaging our people, and we are committing about building this institution. Building this institution to be a world-class, smart university. And our people gave us an unequivocal mandate. Well, of course, fast forward the 10th of April 2019, I was inaugurated as Vice Chancellor of this institution. And I actually titled my presentation as Leading an Inspired One Smart University. And in it, I mentioned the fact that the power of great ideas and the value of all voices will be a norm at CPUT. There is no voice that is going to be smaller than other voices. All voices at CPUT must matter. And that has been the operation since then. And of course, I also share the stories around that boy from Prolru and how we can actually build this institution and ensure that in everything that we are doing, we are smart in both content and context. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a brief history or turning points as far as the smart university is concerned. Our decadal plan, which is a period of 2021 to 2030, is premised on building a one smart university. This was not an ideation, because ideation without execution is nothing more than illusion. Right there and then, we talked about a number of issues, the importance of acting, no matter how small a contribution will be. We believe that together they will make us fulfill our dreams. We talked about deeds, not words. That's why in Latin we talked about acta non verba. And if you look at where we are now and you look back, you can only look back with pride. Because when you look at the TTO, we started from 0. Today we are talking about the license income to the value of $1 million and above. When you look at IP fees, royalties, those were stories that were not here. And of course, the 4 spin-off companies that are doing quite well. Those were things that are brand new to this institution. We also agree that the change is not going to be without inconvenience, because at all times, change is always having inconvenience. We agree at the time that we have to have a large number of our staff with PhDs. And it's a fact that our staff members here, there used to be a lot of staff members, highest qualification is masters. We didn't actually have a lot of people with PhDs. And we said, that must be a start. When we're using the Erasmus action, Erasmus Mundus action, we send our staff. I remember when we were invited in Pretoria, when institutions were saying, we are sending our students, we said, at CPUT, all these opportunities, we are the very first institution through Matusa that was including Le Leuven, the Antwerpen universities in Belgium, and a number of top European universities said, at CPUT, all these opportunities are going to be for staff members. And today we are talking about staff members with qualification from the best universities in the world. That was not an accident. It was a deliberate plan. And today when you talk about more than 30% of our staff with PhD, you'll find that now we rank, in fact more than that, you'll rank among some of the best institutions. We were quite aware that change is not without inconvenience, even worse to better the situation. And we take it to heart that change is hard at the beginning, mess in the middle, and gorgeous at the end. As they say in my language, that pula ki mahlopa asinya. You may not want the rain, you may not want torrential rain, but at the end, you normally smile with a very good yield. We were also aware of the power dynamics between the natural and social sciences, because we had a big contingent of social scientists coming from the Huguenot College. And of course, we had a discussion as to how we can actually stay within our shape and science. Finally, we talked about the leadership that you want and call upon our leadership to lead, to serve. We're talking about servant leadership, that is lead to serve, not to command. And as they say in Latin, praesit ut prosis net ut imperis. We are actually saying our people should be servant leaders. We talked about that. Now, Program Director, Professor Green, we were very careful when you talk about these smart universities. We said everything that you are doing as an institution should speak to smartness and should also speak to oneness. Because we wanted to make sure that whatever we're doing as far as the technology is concerned, one dimension, we must also take our people along. So this issue of coherence in the system, this issue of taking what people are saying as simple issues, emotions, empathy, we have to take them along. And I think we did that well. So if I were to share with you these dimensions, the first one being smartness, we are a University of Technology, and we revel in a culture of learning by doing. That is in our DNA. Our strategies are focused on technological developments and innovation. And that's where we should actually play. We strive to make a better world through education, research, and technological innovation. That's why when you look at the structure, Strategic Initiative and Partnership, or SIP, we were very deliberate because we sent people for training around the whole question of research uptake and utilization. To say, we don't want research for research's sake, but we wanted the dissemination of the outcomes of the results. Every graduation, we used to make it our case to say all the doctoral must arrive a day before the graduation. And they will actually share with the community the findings from their research. And we used to make sure that these are disseminated across the institution and, of course, with the communities as well, to say, what are your findings? We used to listen carefully when they were reading citations as to, we didn't want to hear a biography. We wanted to hear the outcomes and how can those outcomes be shared. Hence, that portfolio of research uptake and utilization. And here we are part of a consortium as well that was well-trained and led by Professor Johan Moton. We went as far as Mauritius to disseminate our information and how we can come up with this idea of the research uptake management, because it is still a problem. Now, coming to oneness, we talk about the 3 U's here, Ubunye, Ugungafani, and Ubuntu. These are the tenets of our strategy that speak to oneness. And we ascribe to an African philosophy that say, I quote, Uguhamba ungcibisihlangu zomnye umuntu, close quote, to walk in someone else's shoes. That everything that we are doing as management, people who are in power, entrusted with power, we should actually put ourselves in the foot of our subordinate in everything that we are doing. That means that now we may be corrective, but we must also be developmental in terms of our approach. Program Director, we have made our choice to be a smart university before the end of this decade. This is a vivid and a compelling description painting a picture with words of where we wanted to be in the next 10 years. Choices we proceed are the hinges to our destiny. We are under no illusion that it's going to be easy towards 2030. It is going to be a rough road, but will ultimately ascend the heights of greatness. As they say in Afrikaans, wie wil eet, wie hienem wil eet, moet steke verdra. I don't know if you want me to translate this for you. If you want honey, you must be prepared for the sting. I can also relate this if you understand my background. Ladies and gentlemen, I repeat, wie hier wil eet moest teken verdra. Without engaging in theological and or cosmological argument, allow me to just to say we are acutely aware that nothing comes from nothing, out of nothing, nothing comes. So we need all shoulder to the will. As they say in Latin, ex nihilo nihil fit. The clarion call is every shoulder to the wheel to realize the high-octane organization that we wanted to build. In this strategy, we are reimagining CPUT as a leading university of technology in South Africa, the continent, and indeed the globe, I repeat. The magnum opus in the making must bear the hallmark of MIT, hence MIT of Africa mantra. It was agreed that the next phase should be dedicated to building a smart university. Everything that we do must support oneness and smartness. So there is a framework for one smart CPUT. In this framework, we agreed that we will follow a focused approach as far as this strategy is concerned. This focus area approach is made of 7 focus areas. That is a smart ITC environment and ITC workforce. Second focus area, smart teaching and learning and smart learning environments. Focus area number 3, a smart RTIP that is relevant and excellent in its knowledge production. Focus area number 4, smart human capital and talent. Focus area number 5, smart internationalization. COVID was the best teacher here, that we continue with internationalization amid COVID. That was smart internationalization in praxis. Focus area number 6, smart engagement and strong links with quintuple helix partners. Focus area number 7, smart student engagement and learning experiences. The emphasis on oneness is directed at creating one institutional culture, because culture is quality. A sense of belonging and an environment in which everyone strives towards the same goal. Taking pride of who we are and how we conduct our business as a university. Working as teams, taking collective responsibility for our future, breaking down silos, working across departments, units, centers, faculties, discipline, and research focus area. Evident by a deep sense of caring about the wellness of others in the workplace and the future of the university. Program director, we agreed we are not going to protect jobs that are going to be annihilated by technological advances, nor train our students in those obsolete areas, but rather we are going to protect our people. And that we can actually do by ensuring that we upskill and reskill our people. We as humans must take up our rightful places in a world more and more populated by machines, machines that are increasingly intelligent. There is a solid evidence from the past that we as humans can upskill. Sometimes when you talk to labor, they'll talk about, but this 4IR, we are going to have a chance, people are going to lose jobs. But colleagues, we cannot afford to be training people who are going to be managers for printing machines. Print management used to be a qualification. Your task is how to print question papers, how to print documents for meetings. We cannot afford to have that. But rather, we have to find ways of upskilling those particular people, reskilling them in such a way that they can actually be able to assist us as an institution to go forward. Program Director, I'm inviting all stakeholders to join us on this one smart CPUT journey as we create futures. We have a responsibility to ensure that our students and our staff are capacitated to join the workforce. There is no denying that the world of work will greatly be impacted by technology and innovation. We fervently believe that CPUT needs to constantly engage, listen, and commit to ask of our society to contribute to this discourse. That's the only way that we can strengthen the social contract and the social ownership of our institution. As I normally say, this institution does not belong to me, it does not belong to us, but it belongs to the next generation, and we must be good custodians. This is the only way that we can recalibrate the social ownership of our universities and strengthen social contract. Our One Smart CPUT is therefore focused on more than the technological world. It is our renewed contract with human centricity, and our biggest assets and resources are our people. We have committed to rolling this out, that we are going to ensure that we train our students well for the future world of work. We'll roll out smart classrooms, incorporating the state-of-the-art technologies and technical platform, smart pedagogy based on modern teaching and learning strategy, and smart campuses. That's why we'll be having the father of smart universities visiting us for almost a month, Professor Uskop from the US. Right, a smart university, ladies and gentlemen, is a university that uses technological innovation within its organization to accomplish its mission. The learning arena is gradually influenced by technological advances such as e-learning, Internet of Things, etc., which are rapidly and absolutely changing the way education provide instruction and teach students. Finally, we should remember that intellectual complacency is not our friend, and that learning is. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to pause and say, Enkosi mawethu, magwande, gwande, magwande kuqhume kube kuhle. Also say, ladies and gentlemen, dames en heren, dit is vir ons 'n groot voorreg om te dien. Inkosi sunene. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, the program director will give justice and to thank the Vice-Chancellor, but the Vice-Chancellor has also asked me to very, very briefly just maybe remind all deans, directors, MANCOM members, EM, etc., about the implementation side, because quite often you have a wonderful dream and a story to tell, but you can't measure it. You don't know how you're going to manage it. You don't know where you will find the evidence that you have actually made a lot of success. We know the old quote, without goals and plans to reach them, you are like a ship that has set sail with no destination. The VC often refers to the following phrase, all hands on deck. And it's not about words anymore, but it's about taking this plan and moving it into action. Chantal, I would just like to say to you, you who are also working with strategies, etc., if you don't break it down in small chunks that people understand what they have to do, it's very difficult to achieve those results. And this was indeed one of the flaws in Vision 2020, because when we reached 2020, it was difficult to really measure its success and implementation. I'm not going to give a lecture on all of this, but I think quite often strategies fail because it's not really thoroughly planned, and it's not also aligned into the fabric of the university. And without referring to the other aspects, I think if there's one thing that Vision 2030 is an example of, is how it's embedded within everything that we're doing, starting right from the top. And this is what is critical for all of us to understand. I've just repeated the focus areas which the VC also eloquently referred to. But how are we going to roll it out? And as senior managers here this afternoon, you will be expected to reflect and give evidence of the progress that you are making in this regard. So yes, we have Vision 2030 on the one hand, and as all of you have been involved in setting your faculty or divisions, KPAs and KPIs, that were done already. And I will just show you a very brief snapshot on how it impacts on the leadership of CPUT. A strategy can only be successful if it's lived by the EM in the case of a university. Right from the top down to the lowest level, people must understand that. So we have done that. I can also say that almost all strategic plans, faculty plans and that of various divisions, are also aligned with the institutional strategy. And I think that in itself is something to be very proud of. I've been working at many universities, and that's a difficult part, to get everyone aligned at the same time. So just to show here, the hard work now is actually lying in front of us. If you look at the 7 goals, I'm not going to read all of this, you can relax. But if we start with to ensure that CTS will support CPUT's core functions through a highly effective and secure technology platform, we've identified the people that must drive that. And in this case, Prof. Mayende is the responsible person there. These goals have been broken down into objectives with action steps and also with a budget, and all of them have been prioritized in terms of a priority key with high impact and or high urgency. And that helps the university to determine its budget and when to spend what in terms of the allocation. But there you can see there's a clear understanding broken down how each and every EM member plus the different support structures will also contribute to a specific focus area. And I've just did the same pattern and showed to you, for instance, the one there about a culture of human centricity. That's, again, Prof. Mayende, because he's the DVC of Ops. But first of all, the EM members will be held accountable to make sure that we reach our goals. So it will be able for someone like Mr. Louis Mapatagane, who's our institutional academic planner, to, on his dashboard, can at any time be able to say how far we are. There's just another example. This is the one of the other 7 focus areas. And if we look here at, I've used CTS as an example, we went further and identified the deadlines or the target lines where they want to be by the end of year 1, 2, and right up to 2030. There you see that. The budget considerations were done. EM is actually meeting tomorrow again to discuss that and to make sure that we fund the priority areas of Vision 2030. How are we going to monitor this? Bi-monthly, quarterly, and annually. So there's a lot of work to be done. So just as how much exciting Vision 2030 is, it's now really about getting the work done. Where are we now? I've mentioned that all faculty strategic plans have been aligned. And the other thing is that it's also aligned with our academic performance plan, which we submit to DHET. It's nothing else that we are going to report on and also be reviewed. Lastly, I think overall, for us, it's now about institutional effectiveness and efficiency, and that will be measured. Having said all of this, I'm going to show you a very short video clip because the VC said also to me, we must show to staff that we are implementing. It's not about a talk shop anymore. Things are happening. And it is indeed happening. And for this purpose, we've put a small clip together, so don't be excited if your faculty doesn't feature there. We have decided to focus more on what's happening also on the administrative and support staff side, and to illustrate to you how people are embracing the concept of and the notion of one smart CPUT. Thank you so much. Derek?
Wow. I think we can give CPUT another round of applause. Vice-Chancellor, we are certainly not kaput. We are indeed one smart CPUT. And I want to thank you, Vice-Chancellor, for indeed a smart and insightful as well as passionate address on Vision 2030, One Smart CPUT. What was extremely evident from your presentation this afternoon is right from the onset you indicated during your inauguration in 2019 that it was absolutely important that at CPUT all voices matter. And how appropriate is it that we find now a Vision 2030 with one of the DNA elements which looks at oneness. I also want to pick up on the fact that there was emphasis placed on the importance of promoting servant leadership, and how we see smartness, learning by doing. And this video clip right at the end is an illustration of the doing that is actually taking place at CPUT. Technological innovation, and this whole notion of oneness, ubunye, ubuntu, and the importance of walking in someone else's shoes. And right at the very end, what comes out extremely strongly is the sense of responsibility, by indicating that all of this belongs to the next generation. So thank you, Vice Chancellor, for that inspiring address this afternoon. Can we give the Vice Chancellor a round of applause? So ladies and gentlemen, moving along on our program this afternoon, we are extremely honored to have our invited guest speaker, Ms. Chantal Ilbery. And before I invite Chantal to the podium, allow me just to mention a brief bio of Ms. Ilbery. Ms. Ilbery is a renowned strategist, facilitator, speaker, best-selling business author, and founding partner of Mind of FFX and its education and training arm, Growing Foxes. A specialist in scenarios, she guides executive teams through strategic conversations across a diverse array of sectors, including energy, and I think how appropriate if you look at the national context, mining, resources, agriculture, transportation, industry, health, retail, and manufacturing. Ms. Ilbery draws on experience working globally as far afield as the UK, Ireland, the US, the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Italy, Hungary, Ukraine, Australia, Jamaica, Kuwait, Singapore, India, Mauritius, Reunion Island, and throughout Africa. She lectures strategy at various business schools and is an executive fellow of Strathmore University. Ms. Ilbery is the co-author with Clem Sunter of The Mind of a Fox, Games Foxes Play, and Socrates and the Fox, published together in 2011 as the Foxed Trilogy. Her fourth book, that's correct, A Fox's Tale, Insights from one of Africa's most creative strategic thinkers, was published by Penguin in July 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our guest speaker this afternoon, Ms. Chantal Ilbery.
I didn't realize what you were doing, and it's still COVID protocol. Face to face, this is quite exciting. Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'll have to say I feel very, very honored to be speaking next to you, Vice Chancellor. I think it was a very inspirational speech. I think seeing that little clip was wow, and having a look and having read through your Vision 2030, I think it's phenomenal and proactive and very forward-thinking. And it makes me think, you know, CPUT is based in South Africa, on the continent. One of the things strategically they say about the continent is, number one, it's a very young population from Africa or in Africa, so therefore our ability to innovate is there already. And we will probably leapfrog in terms of the technology space because we come off a low base and we don't have legacy systems. So if you think about putting CPUT into that context, and then also looking at the research that you would undertake, research that has meaning for the continent and outcomes, as you said, we really would be, or you would really be adding to the global body of knowledge from this continent. So I think you're in quite a unique space to take this Vision 2030 forward. And what I was asked to do today was to say, you know, looking at your journey to Vision 2030, how do you navigate the obstacles? Now, obstacles could be negative threats, or they could be opportunities along the way in terms of the Vision 2030. So, you know, one of the ways to navigate those obstacles is through scenario planning, allowing yourselves to see more than one particular future. The fact that perhaps 2 or 3 in the next, well, it's only 8 years now to 2030, there might be 2 or 3 different futures along the way on the journey. And how do you keep that focus to Vision 2030? So I know you are very excited with Jim Collins in terms of his good to great and his strategic thinking. And I know Jim Collins also talks about foxes and he talks about hedgehogs. And in a strategic sense, they both work together because the hedgehog has a vision, has a single projected future, but the fox understands the journey to get there might be multifaceted, it might be complex, it might have some things thrown at us that disrupt us before we can get back on that path. So, you know, the hedgehog, according to Jim Collins, is very focused, and your Vision 2030 is a focused vision, and it sets very clear direction, I think, in terms of what you would want to look like in 2030. And the fox plays the scenarios along the way to allow you to get there. I'd like to just step back for a minute and say, you know, you do 10-year visions, and 10 years is quite a long time to think into the future. It never used to be, but now when so much is happening, if you try and think of 10 years' time, it's quite far into the distance. And yet, an institution like yourself has to make strategic decisions today that will play out in the next 10 years. So one has to envisage the future in the next 10 years. And then I think I did hear, once you've envisaged that future, break it down so that you can get there. It might be a 3-year strategy, then the second 3-year strategy, and then the next 3-year strategy, which gets you to that end point. Because sometimes if we're trying to think too far ahead, we become not complacent, but we end up not making a decision because it's too far into the future. So I wanted to just look at your Vision 2020. That was a 10-year vision, and I think you probably had a lot of disruptions along the way. But one of the key disruptions, and we all remember it very well, is the fees must fall. That started off maybe as something quite tiny, and it very quickly progressed into something that was very, very prevalent for higher education in particular. And if you think about that whole movement, that was a real disruptor within your 10-year vision. And I'm sure you had to then be adaptable, you had to be agile, you had to try and adjust. And in a way, it was a fairly negative disruption because it affected infrastructure, it affected people being able to come and learn or not learn. And if you think about it, in that 10-year period, education was still in a very physical space. So now what you're actually saying is Vision 2030 is moving out of a particularly physical space into a hybrid operating model. And the use of technology allows you to transcend physical spaces. It allows you actually to be a global player, to be a continental player, to be a player in South Africa and in the Western Cape. So it's a bold vision to 2030. And I think we've already seen, if you're looking at the journey, you've already, within the first 2 years of that 10-year vision, seen a disruption. And that was the pandemic. So, you know, on the way, you've got this vision, you know what you're going to do, you've got your plans in action, your strategic plans, you've cascaded, and then we had the pandemic. And I think initially we didn't think the pandemic was going to, we thought it might be a 5-week in the beginning when we had our lockdown. We thought maybe a 5-week lockdown, then we'll be getting back to normal. And it really has lasted 2 years. And, you know, we're not out of it yet, although we've moved on in terms of our other strategic challenges, but we certainly are not out of it yet. So, of course, it was, again, a negative disruption, certainly to higher education and to education as a whole, but it also has had a positive catalytic effect, because in terms of your Vision 2030, it has really sped up the use of technology very much in a communication space. And I think looking at technology from AI, looking at mechanizing of minds, looking at automation of manufacturing, etc. And I know we say, you know, in the South African context, we're very conscious of jobs and job loss due to technology, but it is going to happen. You know, so whether we stick to an old, keep the jobs, keep the skills as they were, we would move further and further away from global competitiveness if we took that strategic approach. So, you know, the pandemic has started to speed up the uptake of technology, and I think that you're very well positioned in terms of that particular disruption in this 10-year vision. So I wanted to step back and say, you've got the vision, you understand it, it's been very clearly and well articulated, but then we have to understand, in order to get there, we live in a very dynamic world. The landscape within which we operate is moving all the time. So although we've put a whole vision together, and then we've gone down to the 7 focus areas, and then you're going down to objectives and KPIs, etc., you might need to take a different tactic. You might need to strategically move and then come back into play in that 8-year period. And that's because it's a very dynamic and moving world. Now, if we're living in a dynamic and moving world, then education has to develop dynamic thinkers. And I think that that's the one obstacle that we've had in the past in our traditional education system, is that we haven't developed dynamic thinkers, thinkers that are agile, thinkers that are anticipatory of what could play out in the future, and are adaptable and resilient. So our system has not developed dynamic thinkers, yet the ecosystem in which we operate in is very dynamic. So, you know, this combination of how you teach, how you look at your research, and how you develop learners in the system that will move into the future world of work is very, very important, and it's very different to how we've looked at a traditional education system. Having said that, and you might shoot me down, I would say that the education system has not really changed much for about 50 years. And we've tacked on a little bit of technology and a few things, but it has been a very hedgehog system, not a very foxy system. And I think only now that window for opportunity to change is starting to emerge in a very old, well-established, designed system that did meet the needs of the world as it was, but does not meet the needs of the world today. So what kind of world are we living in? If you want to be global players, and because of technology, you're sitting in science, technology, innovation, you're sitting in that space, one could be a global player and look at different research, look at different things that are happening in the world that you would consider taking on and becoming key in terms of your output into a global environment. So it's a dynamic world in the global sense. We are either going to be in one world in the next 8 years to 2030, globalization maybe 3.0, 2.0, but certainly different key players in a new globalized world, integrated world, or by 2030 we're going to be in a very divided world. So we might be in a BRICS, we might be part of the BRICS, and that gains in its influence, and we will start to be participating strategically only in a bloc instead of participating globally. We might be participating more with the East than with the West. And if you start to look at China and the US and that relationship, and I think even the other day the UK were talking about their relationship with China, it may separate, which would mean in some ways strategically we would have to decide, are we more with the West or with the East? Or are we still global players across? And in higher education, you know, you are a front runner, so you are the proactive, you actually build the landscape. If one thinks about the type of research you do, the type of learners you bring into the system, you actually set the scene. Are we going into that divided world or one world? And are we going to have global growth? And I think that that's a key conversation at the moment, or are we going into global recession? So if we are going into global recession, and they're talking about inflation at the moment, if inflation is going to continue to rise, we're going to have interest rates rising. We've got a lot of people globally in high levels of debt. If you think about the pandemic, the money that went into the system, far more, at least 10 times more than what went into the financial crisis in 2008. We are sitting in quite a precarious position with debt, and we could well go into a global recession. That is going to affect higher education institutions. It is going to affect affordability. Again, innovation and technology to bring the cost of things down, I think are spaces, they're opportunities for you to understand the environment and not see it as negative. Obviously, there are threats in the system, but also see it as positive in terms of what areas can you look at in terms of the innovation. So really 4 scenarios to 2030. New Bulls Please, which is a growth scenario globally, and Clem Sunter and myself don't give that a high probability to 2030 unless there's a technology in the energy space, and we can have, you know, battery storage or energy storage, etc. Unless there's something big there, we don't see anything shooting the lights out to actually give us a New Bulls Please scenario, a global growth scenario. Hard times, we don't really see happening. We did see that after the financial crisis, but we no longer really in one world. There are a lot of things that are geopolitical activities that are starting to take us from one world down into a more divided world. So, you know, the 2 scenarios that you would be positioning yourselves within probably to 2030, during your vision 2030, is either a fork lightning, which is the worst case scenario in a global sense. Again, where can you use technology, innovation, process to create something new in a fork lightning scenario? Or we'll be in a UV, which in an economic terms is some countries in a U, where they are stagnating, they're not growing, and then some countries going into the V and starting to see global growth again. And then again, you would then be fragmenting and looking at the world not from one particular global space. You would be looking at certain countries that are moving forward and other countries that are stagnating. So, you know, it's a dynamic that you would need to play in, and you would be able to hold those scenarios to see what is actually happening. And I think just one of the biggest things in the global since the pandemic, the other big disruptor that has happened to date is Russia-Ukraine. And again, you know, we thought, oh, well, that's happening there, Russia and Ukraine. But we've seen the consequences of it playing with food security, the other day I was listening to people talking about visas, mobility of people can't get it because they're looking at Ukraine. So it's had quite a few consequences. But again, use the scenarios, think of the obstacles that could actually hit you in terms of your vision 2030. And again, I would reiterate, the positiveness is technology in this whole story. So if that's where you're positioned, that's where you actually could really excel in all four of those scenarios. But it's a different mindset across them. Then I wanted to just say these are the four scenarios. New balls, please. That's a technology scenario. Hard times. Just a stalling global economy. UV, two-speed. Of course, it's not a two-speed global economy, but it's also the unvaccinated and the vaccinated that at one point in time strategically showed some countries that were fully vaccinated or 90% vaccinated were opening up their economies, others were still in lockdown. And then the last one is the fork lightnings. So, you know, another spiraling trajectory of economic decline and rising tensions in that type of scenario. How does that affect us in South Africa? Again, there are some challenges in South Africa. So you have a vision 2030, clear, again, articulate, but we're in the context of the challenges in South Africa. And social cohesion is one of our key uncertainties. If we were to have high social cohesion to 2030 in South Africa, we would start to have collaboration. We would start to look at the relationship between government and business in a more positive light. We would look at academia being part of the government, business, academia type of relationship, looking at skills going forward. But if we don't have those partnerships and those collaborations, we're going to have low social cohesion, where we're all separated and we are not working together. Our economic climate is negative. We went into the pandemic, so you went into 2021, first year of your 10-year vision, with, in South Africa, a very poor economic climate. So the question is, by 2030, will that economic climate be positive? Will it be growing? Will we be seeing growth? Four scenarios. The best case scenario is by 2030, South Africa has a people's economy. It means it's inclusive. It's from the ground upwards. And I would reiterate, yourselves as CPUT would have a very key place as a higher education institution in developing a people's economy. And so I suppose you would look at it and say, what does that scenario mean for South Africa, and how would we play as CPUT in that scenario? Solidarity Fund, I think we saw that for about 5 weeks when we went into lockdown. We all put money in the system. We all locked ourselves in. We didn't even go out into the garden. We listened. And then we started to see some levels of corruption that were being exposed. And I think Solidarity Fund dropped down into almost a cautionary tale. So, cautionary tale scenario to 2030 for South Africa: poor economic climate and low levels of social cohesion. Thabo Mbeki spoke the other day, and he talked about another uprising like Tunisia, an Arab Spring, with the youth, if you look at the high level of unemployment with the youth. So a cautionary tale scenario for South Africa will be a difficult environment in order to operate. And again, I think that you should be positioning yourself with that understanding of the context in which you're operating so that you can optimize and still achieve that vision 2030. And just to put into play and mind the gap, if South Africa were to move to positive economic climate, but it's through big business becoming bigger and small businesses falling aside because they can't compete, I think that we're going to have very low levels of social cohesion, and we're going to see a lot of unrest in the system and social dynamics coming into play, and social justice being one of the key negatives in terms of a mind the gap scenario. So I put that out there. There are obstacles, there are opportunities within these scenarios before you get to 2030. How do you put your strategic plans across these scenarios to make sure you're still heading in the right direction? So people's economy, best case scenario, cohesive, solidarity fund rallying around the flag. Thank goodness we didn't pay for that, was it a 20 million flag? Mind the gap, I don't think is a good scenario for us to go into, and then the cautionary tale. So, just talking about our politics going forward, talking about the end of the year, the ANC, talking about 2024, it all fits within your 2030 vision. So how do you deal with it? How do you maneuver around it? And how do you articulate and keep your strategy on course? And maybe year one, or well, you're into year two already. Year 3 and year 4 you might have to pull back a bit, and then you can accelerate. So, it's not an even pace to get to the end as well. So I wanted to also just very quickly, because I see it is in your vision 2030. So I work with the African Union, and I actually work on the Emerging Leaders program at the African Union, and that's age 22 to 35. So they bring 2 people from each country, 54 countries in Africa, and they spend a year at the African Union. And I actually work with them on how to think strategically, how to be dynamic thinkers, and how to look at Vision 2063. Because this was developed in 2013, so they took a 50-year view. Now, a lot of things are going to happen before 2063. So how, as young leaders, can you imagine 2063, break it down into 10-year, 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 have a look at the projects, and I think CPUT sits on the continent, and I think could be a key part of the aspirations for 2063. So a prosperous Africa, okay, inclusive growth, integrated continent, an Africa of good governance and democracy, a peaceful and secure Africa. So in their first 10-year, which ends 2013 to 2023, they did have one strategy, silencing the guns. Now, that hasn't happened in Africa. So we've gone 10 years and we haven't got to that point yet. But we have looked at the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. So that's been taken up, and that in the next years could potentially put the continent into a global space. But an Africa whose development is people-driven, young population, and an Africa's strong, united, resilient, and influential global player and partner. So again, I think that the continent has got a lot to offer the global environment, and I think it's the time to put it in this 10 years. So just to bring it back to yourselves, you're trying to move from a traditional education system into a smart education system. And I saw this in your vision, and you obviously have certain pillars on how you're going to do it. But overlaying moving from traditional to smart education, you have very high level of youth unemployment, and your pipeline comes from basic education, which I want to just talk about after this slide. Agenda 2063 is part of your traditional education moving into a smart education within the African context and a global context. We've got the National Development Plan, which was or is till 2030, and I think not too much has been implemented around the National Development Plan to date. The white paper on STI is one of the drivers that you've operated within that framework. And then you talk about CPUT's future students. So you talk about they're going to have foresight, they're going to have resilience, they're going to be ethical, they're going to be able to have relationships. You will need to build those skills, because that's not where the education system has come from to date. So part of that vision for you is not only the content, it's going to be the skills of those students that you actually have to build. So the future world of work, we know, is different. The disconnect between the education system and students that come out is vast at this point in time. So you have a lot of work to do in that Vision 2030. And then, of course, working in higher education. You know, how do you as lecturers and academics operate, and as deans operate in a system that is bringing learners in, using technology, going hybrid, and, you know, what you're trying to achieve by 2030. And I just bring that in because last week I was doing some lecturing at Stellenbosch University, but it was for the construction sector. So it was a 4-week program that they brought into the engineering department. So it was from the construction industry, potential leadership. But you know, the average age was probably between 30 and 60. And I missed my flight. And I couldn't be there for the 2 days, 2 mornings of lecturing. So I said, that's fine, put me on the screen and I'll talk to the class. That was an issue at Stellenbosch University, to actually get that technology right. And then for the students, you know, who was going to talk? And then I was saying, okay, row 5, number 2, tell me what you think of this question. Then they had to do a project that evening. So I said, well, I'm on WhatsApp. You just send me in your group a question and I'll come back to you and, you know, I'll draw something and send you a picture. We can have a chat. It was a bit of a difficult story. And then by the second day, they said, no, it was great. We loved the content, but the technology we can't use. It has to be face-to-face. So we have an older generation that cannot do this Vision 2030, but the younger generation can. So, you know, as lecturers, I think that's one of the things that you would really have to look at. How do you utilize technology and not just change your lecture onto a screen, but how do you use the technology in conjunction with, you know, the learning experience? So I'm going to end off with this because I think it's your biggest obstacle to 2030. I did some work with basic education scenarios. So it was mainly high school going into university. We had about 150 participants from around South Africa and Southern Africa. And we looked at the education system to 2030. Not the higher education, although I think there's some relevance there. But looking at the education system, the pipeline of students that are going to come into your system that you're looking at to 2030. And we said highly relevant education, or an irrelevant education. And that is a matter of action. That is a matter of actioning everything that you've talked about, because if you don't action it, it will still become irrelevant. And then the other thing is the culture of openness to change. Now, I've been into a lot of schools, and although they talk about the future world of work and they've tacked on coding or robotics, it is still a very traditional system. So the culture of resistance to change is still in that system. Now they're going to come out of that system into your system that you're building. I think it's probably the biggest obstacle that you will face, rather than any of the other things, global, South Africa, politics, economics. So really there were 4 scenarios that came out. Good to great, Jim Collins. An enabling environment that is technologically relevant and characterized by innovation in high school before they come to you, because then they're prepared for the journey that you're going to take them on. Then we have a highly relevant education, but a culture of resistance to change, where to 2030, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So every inch of innovation is fought for. And while the system is evolving, the pace of change is slow. Then we've got the worst case scenario, a culture of resistance to change and an irrelevant education. And that's very content heavy still. Certainly the curriculum in the high school, very content heavy, very academic, still actually suitable to go to UCT or to Stellenbosch because, you know, it's still the same type of ecosystem. To then come here, which is more relevant in the world today, is going to be an adjustment. So content-heavy system characterized by unmotivated teachers, learners, producing young people that are unfit for the future world of work. So it's almost a plucked ostrich that we're going to just keep plucking that ostrich with the head in the sand. And of course, the 4th one is you are open to change, but it's irrelevant education. So you're tacking on innovation with limited capacity and resources and misguided design, where the learners are an afterthought, and that's up the wrong tree. So yes, it is going towards a technical or technological space, but up the wrong tree. And I think that, you know, there is also a probability that that could happen in the high school system, and that's what you would have to contend with in this next vision. So if I may say, out of the 150 participants, most people said that it's still a plucked ostrich and could well be until 2030. So, and if you have just look at South Africa and our students and our learners, we have great inequality that are coming into the system. However, they can leapfrog into your system, but you've just got to make sure your design is right at all levels. So I'm going to end off and say, you know, Vision 2030, 1 smart CPUT, I think is funky, very catchy, but from a strategic perspective, I think it says so much. 1 smart CPUT. It's a very clear vision. Smart, I think, is very well understood as to what it means. 1, I think, is very well understood in terms of creating a new identity, which is what Africa is doing at the moment, trying to create a new identity in the global environment. So creating a new identity, integrating with technology, I think is a very clear, very succinct vision. So I'll end off with, may the fox be with you. Thank you. Oh, yes, yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. That was so inspiring. Can we give Ms. Chantal Ilbery another round of applause? Thank you. Thank you so much. It was inspiring. You've highlighted the various scenarios. You're also brutally honest, and I think that is what we are looking for as a university here. And I know we've got a room and an audience full of academics, and so now we've come to the session of a Q&A, and I do believe that we do have a roaming microphone that is around. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open it up now for any questions, and the questions can pertain to the keynote address by our Vice-Chancellor, as well as the presentation by Ms. Ilbery. I do have a few questions, but let's open it up to the floor first. There we have a hand right in the end, so we take one, and then we go to number 2, which is Dr. Powell.
Thanks. Program Director, firstly, let me apologize. I thought it's important that I need to make this comment before I leave. I have other commitments at 6 o'clock. It's not a question per se, but I have a comment directed to the VC. To say my view is that with this Vision 2030, it is important that as we go along, we make sure that no one is left behind. Because I sense that based on the presentation that was made by Prof. Haysom, to say we might have a good presentation, but people on the ground does not understand as to what needs to be done. Therefore, it's important that going forward, all of us should rally behind this vision, because it's a good vision, and it's a vision that should be supported by all of us. I think that's what I wanted to say, and thanks again. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. If I could also ask that when you make your comment or your question, if you could please just mention your name. We do have Dr. Powell in the front.
Thank you. My name is David. I work at CPUT. My question is, thanks to the Vice-Chancellor and our guest speaker, Ms. Ilbery, my question is directed to you. One of the critical uncertainties for our sector, or probably the whole country, is the financial constraints that we're going to face for probably the next couple of years. How do we inspire confidence in terms of us achieving Vision 2030 in a situation where people know that a critical uncertainty is the availability of funds across the sector to ensure that we achieve our vision and also the kind of objectives, whether it's the NDP or other national imperatives. How do we get around it to make sure that people still buy into the vision, knowing full well that there are challenges from a financial and resource point of view? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just take those 2 questions for now, and maybe I should start with the Vice-Chancellor. I know that was just a comment, but Vice-Chancellor, do you want to respond to that, or you want to make a further contribution?
Yes, I would like to comment. It's really a comment, but it's very important to agree with Mr. Ranyao that that's actually the way to go. We have to ensure that we take our people along and no one is actually left behind. That's very, very important. I think one particular angle that we did not really highlight is the whole question of the African university. One thing that is important that we always raise is that we are an African university, not by virtue of geography, but by the way we are actually executing our activities. It's not a question of geography. So it's very important that we have to take into account our contextual specificities. In particular, if you look at the number of people that we insourced, for example, we have to find a way in which even the person at the gate of CPUT should speak about Umbono 2030. So they should actually embrace umbono. And we're definitely going to find a way. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Ms. Ilbury, can I yield to you for the second question that was raised by Dr. Pau?
On now, thanks. Just to the comment, your reply was fantastic. It's ground-up approach. It's not a top-down strategy and a vision. And always remember that. So if it's a ground-up, you will pull people with you rather than imposing something, Funding, higher education. I can't solve it. It's an interesting one, and it obviously actually was highlighted with the fees must fall. I think that's when one started to look at funding models, and I'm not too sure whether your funding mainly comes from students, and therefore if you have a look at a cautionary tale scenario in South Africa, that affordability is going to be critical. If you are becoming a technology or moving more and more into that space, sometimes technology initially is expensive, but then it actually is far cheaper in the long run than running a physical university. So, that's the trade-off. I think, how would you fight for funding in relation to all the other higher education institutions? And I believe CPUT has got a unique differentiator. I actually think that technology, research meeting the needs of society going forward in Africa, and if you play on all of those concepts, you could eventually have overseas people coming to study here, because here's where the challenges are around the world. So I think it's about, you're going to have to position yourself against your competitors and actually see yourself in a way above some of the traditional universities that you always perhaps think, oh, they get everything and we don't. And that's going to be messaging and communication. Having said that, I think funding is going to constantly be your key uncertainty.
Sure. Thank you. I think just to add to that, couldn't agree with you more. One of the areas that is often promoted within the university is in the area of research, and the research that is applicable and finding solutions for societal problems in the society in which we serve. Let's take another round of questions, and I see the Dean's hands have been raised. Can we start at the end with Prof. Nondi, then go on to Prof. Kyoko, and I see right in the front, Prof. Hayswimmer.
Thank you. The Vice Chancellor indicated that every small voice make a contribution into making a difference when it comes to our Vision 2030. But in the presentations, the limitations, they've come up quite loud in terms of funding, and probably need the diverse communities that we have in terms of our student population. But my question is going to our keynote speaker, is to ask, in terms of strategic move, how do we move in a position whereby we use the little that we have to make a contribution without looking into getting huge funding? For example, how can we bring in indigenous knowledge that our environment is presenting as Africa, in making sure that we are innovative in coming up with smartness and oneness, and that will contribute into our bigger vision of our Vision 2030 of our university.
That's such a
My name is I'm Tembisa Ngondi. I'm the Dean of Faculty of Informatics.
Thank you, Ms. Nondi. Sorry, Prof. Nondi. Can we ask the second question? Let's take a round and then we'll answer. Prof. Kyoko?
Thanks very much. My name is Joseph Kyoko. I'm the Dean of Applied Sciences. I was reflecting earlier on in your presentation, and thanks very much, really insightful, about the disruptors and how the disruptors can in fact be enablers. And one of the things that I was putting down in my own thoughts was the students that we get, almost as an enabler as opposed to a drawback, as you presented at the end. And the issue of students that are underprepared, in quotes, has been with us in higher education for many, many years. From the 60s, 70s, 80s. If you go back in the literature, they are the same challenges, that the students are not prepared. They need an extra year, they need a foundation year. So that has been on for a long time. And it's not so much really about the students being underprepared, but the universities being underprepared for the students. And I see with where the students are, they're actually better prepared for the smart approaches that we want to have. They are more, in fact, sometimes ahead of us. In some cases, they come from schools where they're ahead of the university in terms of the use of the smart approaches. So I see that as a strength, and I see that as almost an enabler to where we want to be, accepting that the issue of students being ready for university education is almost a constant. We have to be prepared for the students. We are the underprepared part in this relationship, as opposed to seeing them as the ones who are underprepared. But I think the skills they bring to us as they come, I think they are a strength to us as opposed to a problem. So I don't know what you think. So I had quite the opposite view of the incoming students in terms of our ability to achieve our goals. Just your thoughts, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Kyoko. Silbury, I trust you taking note of the questions. And let's do the final question, Prof. Hayswimmer.
Thank you so much. Actually, in line also with what Prof. Kyoko asked, it reminds me of the time when lecturers, academics were reminded of don't wish the students away because they're ill-prepared or whatever. Teach those in front of you. In other words, work with what you have and add the biggest value to those students. And I think it's something that I'm personally very passionate about. But that brings me to my question. And through centuries, many people have asked this question, and this is, what kind of university for South Africa, globally? My concern is that I think there are many, many institutions of higher learning that are not relevant. When I think of that one slide, they actually just prepare students to be jobless at the end. And so for me in South Africa, it's something that I'm still grappling with. What kind of university? And you refer to, if you make your strategic partnerships, the issue of West and East. Am I right or wrong, or what are your views when I say that maybe the problems or our alliances are no longer necessarily in the West, but where innovation is happening quite often is more to the East? And should that not be something that we should be thinking of? But I think that issue about what kind of university, should it be traditional? Do we have too many traditional universities in South Africa, in the world, that are not really future-looking enough?
Thank you, Prof. Hayswimmer. So there's a 3 round of questions. Would you like to take the first from Prof. Nondi?
Okay, so I think the first was indigenous knowledge and how can you use what you've got to position yourself. Am I correct? Was that the... So, you know, many years ago, I actually worked with UKZN. And it was almost at the time of the merger, when they also had a merger with Westville University, Durban, and Pietermaritzburg together. And then they went on a mission about indigenous knowledge. So at the university, they were going to be teaching indigenous knowledge to feed into the global body of knowledge, rather than, and maybe it is the West imposing curriculum on us in Africa and the type of knowledge that we have to have. It didn't gain traction at the time in a global sense, and I think perhaps because it was poorly designed and then poorly executed. But if I was to come back to 2022, today, the world today, I actually think that the relevance, and I've done a lot of work in Africa and in different countries, and I think that the challenges that Africa is facing actually they're not unique, but the rest of the world will learn from how we solve those challenges. And they might take learners or take communities in that come from a more basic, not a very mature, perspective, but how do you solve at that level? And I think that that's the critical essence that will play into the future global body of knowledge. How do you solve? And it's almost simply, but using technology or using innovation and not trying to work with something that is, traditionally been our intake. So I do come back. I think that there are a lot of challenges that need to be addressed and really articulated in the African context that could have global appeal. And I think for that you would get funding. I think that that's the areas. I look in agriculture. They looking to fund projects that have relevance in terms of the research, in terms of small-scale farmers or something. How do you beneficiate in the mining sector on this continent? So there are projects that I think would get funding, certainly from a research perspective. Does that help?
I think it's a matter of defining technology itself, because it is not about indigenous knowledge in terms of producing the solutions, how do you bring these solutions. Because in terms of Africa, the number of technology that Africa has, which may not be defined as technology in today's terminology, but when you take that, you translate it into Vision 2030, and you automate it, it becomes a variable technology, because it's technology. It's the kind of the solution they produce in terms of bringing their solutions as they use it to achieve their goal and mandate. And if you look into that, it's actually technology, but it depends what kind of resources has been used to come up with that kind of technology.
Yeah. What is defined as?
That's why my question is to say, how do we translate the indigenous knowledge, what we have, into the growth, into the futuristic technology that we're looking into automating now going forward?
But that you can do, because we can leapfrog in technology. We must not underestimate our leapfrog, and it actually plays a little bit into, your question there. Learners, even in high school, are technologically advanced. They already have that we don't. So it's about utilizing that skill. So to come to your question as well, and I've seen it in the high school system, it's the teacher who is scared of technology that holds the pupils back. So you do already have an advantage and a strength coming into your system because they are frustrated in that ecosystem of the traditional learning space where the teacher has not used technology. I mean, in some schools, you know, they also say cell phones are, you're not allowed to have a cell phone. In today's world, and I do know we've gone through the whole thing about what you do on the cell phone and that, but, you know, we're in a system, the University of the Future, where it's not about content that we have to teach, because I can get that on the Google. I can find out all that knowledge. It's about how I use it and what I'm going to do with it and how I solve problems and how I say, here's a challenge. How do I find the crux of that challenge? Because that's pure strategy. And how do I solve for it? So we've already got young people that are in that space, held back in a system. And I'd say globally, you know, I wouldn't only put it to South Africa, but very much it is in South Africa. So how do you utilize that as a strength going forward? And that means that your ecosystem as lecturers and academics has to change and allow to give some space to, it's a two-way relationship. And you're not there just to teach them to get on, they will also participate equally. So I'm with you there. And if I can just answer the third question, the University of the Future. Again, that was a question that UCT looked at and said, you know, what's the University of the Future? What are the type of students that we want to produce? Is it going to be content heavy? Can they just choose from humanities and science and technology and integrate it? What are we going to look like in the future? And I think that's a work in progress. But just one thing that struck me, and it's a dot on the side. I was in West Africa and there was a student that was studying and it was entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship that links to business. So it's not just going to university to study entrepreneurship and develop the skills for entrepreneurship, it's about linking it to being able to get a job. So the link between entrepreneurship and employability is actually very strong. And whether you start your own business or not doesn't matter. It's the mindset that you're actually developing so that they can be employable. Because when we talk about the future world of work, we can think about what jobs there'd be, we don't know. But can that student or that learner actually think? And that's what you're trying to do. And of course, you're using technology because that's the fourth industrial revolution. And that's the way it's going. So, you know, I don't know if that helps to answer to a point. Yeah.
Sure. Vice-Chancellor, would you wish to add to any of the three questions or comments that were raised?
Yes, I wanted to add on the indigenous knowledge and what is it that we can actually do in practical terms. That I think the ground is actually ripe for us to design electives that, whether you can call it CPUT 101, that we can include in our curriculum, whether that should be a must for every student, depending on the content. Look, we already have something similar around D6 in terms of understanding the history there of forced removal. And then, of course, we also had something around food, indigenous food in terms of edible insects, you name them, which are cheaper sources of protein. And that is actually indigenous. And then, of course, we can talk about agriculture as well. We can do something there around Nguni cattle, Nguni chicken. It's already happening, and how these kind of animals withstand harsh conditions, harsh African conditions. And then, of course, during World Design Capital, I think we tried something. I'm saying this because it's right in your faculty around African designers. There are so many. Some of them self-taught, like Ms. Mahlangu, for example, who was actually part and parcel of a project around the BMW and us here during 2014. So there is so much work that can be done around designing, which of course are indigenous design. And there is no other institution that's strong in design here like us. And I don't know if we still want to pursue a design school, but there is so much that can be done in terms of actually mainstreaming and embracing all forms of knowledge, because that can only make us better as a country and also bring some things that are not known by other people. And in that case, you also be embracing diversity.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Let's take another round of questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm also very mindful of time. And I do want to suggest that this be the final round of questions. So if you could raise your hand. I see Mr. Mapatahane, I see Dr. Makahula, and I see Prof. Mg. And Mr. Chibogunse. Thank you, those four.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My question is about age. We know that, for example, people in Japan are older than, their children, the proportions, whereas in Africa we've got the opposite. So from a planning and futuristic perspective, how do we make sure that we do not lose Africans? Because Africans now are thinking that, let me go and stay in Italy, because Italians are much older, and therefore we can work for them. So how do we reverse that from a planning and futuristic scenario?
Thank you, Prof. Mg. Mr. Mapatahane.
Thanks, Program Director. My colleague was just telling me, yeah, you can't help it, can you? I certainly have a lot to say, and thank you for that keynote address, Ms. Elbury, and thanks, Vice Chancellor. I certainly have a lot to say, and I don't have enough time to say all I need to say. But I just want to tease out one which is really about funding, and I think it's a headache for everyone. The first three comments were talking about funding. And as the questions were being asked, I was so glad that in our objectives, we don't have as a strategic objective that says wealthy and well-resourced, which means we had to go after money. But if you look at Objective 4, which is about smart human capital, if you look at Objective 5, internationalization, if you look at Objective 6, which is about the triple helix, partnerships and engagement and community engagement, and if you look at the last one, which is student engagement, the key is there. It seems as if Vision 20, the wealth is in our people and our community and our graduate. And if we pursue that, then they will be able to keep the institution financially sustainable. And I just want to give an example of the current pandemic that we're facing, where institutions didn't have money to buy devices and mobile data and all. But it was their partners, their alumnus, rallying behind the institution and purchasing devices and stuff to make sure that the business of the university continue. And I think that is where, I could be wrong, Vice Chancellor, but perhaps you can comment here. I think I was not here when Vision 2030 was born, but perhaps that was the idea, that the wealth, the future wealth of CPUT is in the people. and the communities around. And if I tie that with the one of the diagrams that you had about the economic climate and the social cohesion, and you look at the top right there, which is about people's economy. Even though the economy may be positive, I don't think we'll get more funding from the fiscus as higher education. And with the increase of research output, which is one of the key funding areas for university, and everybody's talking, if we research more, if we publish more, we'll get more money. I think there's going to come a time where there won't even be funding for the amount of output. And we may have to change the criteria to impact. And impact, we all know, the highly impactful papers are those of collaboration and international partnerships. So, and those that are applied research, which is solution-based kind of research and technology, all of which is espoused in Vision 2030. So I think if, as an institution, find a way to unpack more focused in those areas, we may find the wealth which we are looking for. That's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mapatachane. Can we just pass the microphone to Mr. Chibogotse?
Mine is a very extremely short, very small comment. My name is Ruben. I am a risk facilitator at the institution. I just want to appreciate your expertise and the Vice Chancellors and everyone here. And also just to specify that this is a very risk discussion, or risky discussion, so to speak. And I was very fascinated. And thanks for coming. And just to close, I think I'll just give a few examples, not to waste your time. That the EDF for finance plays around with exactly what you were saying about the scenarios and stressing the balance sheet and the numbers and all that. So it's a journey that is quite fascinating for me, as well as some other conversations from IT and etc. So I think on behalf of my boss, Prof. Driki, this is certainly slackening up for me as a job, because this is the highest risk stage of risk, highest level of maturity from a risk perspective to talk about scenarios at an institutional level, because that's what financial institutions are doing, and we are doing that. And I've been, trying to see other institutions what they are doing. They are not doing scenarios as yet. So I would like to thank the VC and senior management for being ahead of the pack. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, and that's coming from our enterprise risk manager, Dr. Makahula.
Thank you, Program Director. I think Mr. Chibogodze is making a mistake here. I think this is a quality discussion and not a risk discussion. It's facilitated by CTS.
Says the Director of Quality.
All right, so I think in your presentation, ma'am, you mentioned fees must fall, as a disruptor. And one of the calls that the students were really making was about this notion of decolonization, And a few years down the line, I mean, our system is still sitting within this colonial architecture. And I'm wondering, having studied our Vision 2030 years, whether are there any aspects, opportunities within that vision that you think we can take advantage of, to advance this whole notion of decolonization of education? Thanks.
Thank you. So those are the round of questions as well as comments Ms. Ilbury, would you like to start first?
Okay, so the age one. It's an interesting one because in a traditional mindset, or how we've always thought about age, you know, there's a retirement age and you stop working and then make room for younger people. We've also got an age story around, even in politics, let's bring younger voices into politics. And, you know, we've got old thinking. How can you develop policy for the fourth industrial revolution in an older mindset? And I think what is happening in the leadership space is that leadership itself is acknowledging the diversity of age. So experience is important, but it has to sit alongside innovation and new thinking. And if one as a leader could, coming back to people, manage that relationship, you then are starting to have a far more diverse workforce from an age perspective, which is far more optimized, rather than, you know, well, I'm old, there's no space for me here, I've got to go to Italy or whatever. And I do know in Japan, they have a very aging workforce in Japan. And they have now innovated and creatively thought, how do we utilize this vast experience and utilize 80-year-olds? And it is with technology. And there is a space. So it's about what can you do, even though you might officially have been retired. And I think that's the type of, you know, innovative question one should be looking at around age. Am I continuing with?
Yes, you can continue. The next question or comment rather was raised by Mr. Mapatahane around the whole notion of the wealth. Is it actually our people, our graduates?
So, as you were talking and going through, you know, what you were talking about with the wealth, I actually thought that is really, you know, you're talking about you're a technology and innovation university, but you need to innovate yourself. So your thinking around funding has to become more innovative in terms of where do you get to the crux of the problem and the challenge and see where you can build some momentum. So I think if I understood what you were saying, it's about looking at where you can position to get those projects, looking at some of those objectives that you've got there and combining, connecting dots there and saying, this is leverage for us to get the funding. And that means creative thinking and on your own part in terms of positioning yourself. That's my take, and I'm sure, Vice Chancellor, you'll have more too.
Yes, I can briefly add here, I concur with Mr. Mapatahane around our people being our wealth, and I will actually talk from one particular perspective. One, we are busy with an app, I think we have finished with Chancellor, around being able to locate our alumni in real terms, where they are and how they are doing. And that app is actually available. And I must say that I think that is going to be a game changer for an institution as well. Because one thing that we have seen is that our alumni are not giving back to your alma mater. And some of them are doing well. But it's something that we have to do while they are here. We have to ensure that now we take care of our people. It's actually the center, so that they do not actually forget their mother, their alma mater. The second aspect that I wanted to highlight is the power of great ideas, the whole question of innovation. we have had great technologies coming from this institution. One of them is the flow fees. That's why I highlighted some of the license fees that we are enjoying, the royalties that we are enjoying. But I think we can actually do more in terms of investing in innovation, investing in great ideas. And the success we know is very low, but the reward is actually maximum if we can actually be able to embrace open innovation, take ideas even that are coming from the community, of course addressing the question of Professor Ngondi, and making sure that those particular ideas can actually be commercialized for the benefit of the institution and the people of the Republic. I think that's where the wealth is.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Then we had Mr. Chibongotse that made a comment about the importance of this type of discussion here this afternoon, and the reasons why it's important to do things like scenario planning, because it feeds into risk, right? And I think the final question was a question that was raised by Dr. Makahula around the whole notion of the disruptors. And Ms. Aylesbury, one of the slides that you showed was starting off with fees must fall as a disruptor. So what is your response to the question that was raised by Dr. Makahula?
Okay, so I think I was called in to do some scenarios around the fees must fall. Some of the key students that were involved in the movement, some of the academics, etc. And so we did build some scenarios on it. And I think what came out of it is, although it's about affordability and university fees or institutional fees, it's also about living expenses. It's also about the transport. And then eventually it went into, it's about the curriculum and it's about decolonizing. So in some ways, they're two separate arguments or two separate challenges. One is fees must fall, and the other is around the curriculum and decolonization. And I think in the fees must fall, it all got, sort of put together. So again, one must unpack the challenges and tackle them as they are. In the decolonization, I mean, that was a strong movement, and I think it still is. And my view, and I'm just talking from my own point of view, I think the concept, first of all, the word and the concept of decolonization is interpreted in perhaps a negative sense. And again, it's a mindset shift. What is relevant to the context of Africa today and in the future? And that's the question we should be asking, rather than trying to push back on decolonization. And I think that we have traditionally had a lot of our education system has come from the West. So we've had years, of an English system that's been put on us. And I think the question should be a forward-thinking question. What is our context? We're strong in diversity, and how do we look to our future to position ourselves on the continent as a more fruitful strategic argument? Yeah.
Thank you very much. So before we close this session, I think it'll be prudent for us to really tap into the mind of a fox, if I may. And much of what you have said this afternoon, we have gleaned off your experience, your international engagement, as well as your national engagement. But if there was one thing that you would leave with CPUT this afternoon, what would it be, in view of the fact that I've heard you mention more than twice this afternoon that CPUT is in a unique space to take the journey forward. And if we have to reflect as an institution, what was the one thing that Chantal Ilbery left with us? What would it be?
Well, something that struck me, and this is not the one thing, but you want to be the MIT of Africa. And I think that that's aspirational, and I think that you can be that. I would have no doubt that if that's where you wanted to position, you would be differentiating yourself, you would be focusing what that Vision 2030 is doing. And it would be one smart CPUT. So I really like that. I worked in Mauritius a little while ago, and they've got a vision to 2030, a smart island by 2030. That's their vision. Then I thought, well, what's South Africa's vision? And I couldn't in one sentence put what's South Africa's vision. And Mauritius is doing that in every way. A smart island. Technology is key in terms of taking them economically forward and socially forward. So one smart CPUT, an MIT type positioning, I think is doable and is your differentiator and will make a real difference to this country and to Africa as a continent. I think you will make a real difference, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Vice Chancellor, would you like to make any closing remarks for this particular session?
Yes, please. I will not resist the temptation. I think there's one particular point that I wanted to raise. It's actually on the wealth question. I really wanted to pursue this question and deepen our understanding and our approach around wealth and funding. And my colleagues who were together in France, you have seen great institutions. And what is it that we have learned? And the question of collaborations, whether it is not the right time that we have to rethink the whole question of collaboration. I know South African instruments are not assisting or encouraging collaboration within the institution. Rather, they're encouraging competition. But in the true sense of the words, collaboration is an African thing. That's why we have Ubuntu in this particular document. How people collaborate to tackle a problem. I may not know it in other language, but in my language, when you talk about Litsima, when you got a problem, you call all members of a village to come and help you with a particular problem. Either is to deal with issues in a maize field, etc. So we have to rethink collaboration because we know that you either collaborate or collapse as an institution. Now, how do we ensure that instead of collapsing, we focus on the barriers to collaboration? And I think as an institution, if we choose our partners right across the globe, we'll be able to take this institution forward and very fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this has really been an excellent discussion and dialogue that has taken place here. And I just have one more duty as the program director, just to remind you all that please do not leave the venue because there is a request to do or to take rather, a group photograph at the end. And please allow me at this juncture to call upon our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Teaching and Learning, Professor Rishi Balkaran, who would do the acknowledgements as well as the closure. Prof. Balkaran, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, and good evening. I was wanting to just take my sheet out and read a whole barrage of people that I need to thank and then get done with it. But of course, the discussion has been so inspiring. Ms. Ilbrey, it's really been great to have this discussion. I think the experience certainly is coming through. And I think most importantly is just the point about taking a step back every time and just reviewing where we are and where we want to be. And of course, the bigger picture. And I think whilst you were, forgive me colleagues, I have the flu, so I'll be coughing in between. But whilst we were having this discussion, I pondered and I was wanting to raise my hands to say, yes, we are doing this. Yes, we are doing that. Because so often do we fall into the trap that when you talk about strategic planning, it has to be at ISPC. That when you talk about strategic planning, it has to be in an engagement like this. Prof. Ngondi raised a point about IKS. We had a big discussion today about a wonderful presentation done by Professor Berger on naming buildings at the university. And of course, if we take that as an extension of IKS, we can think strategically about that. We spoke about trying to find sources of funding. I thought, Mr. Mapachakane, you were going to go there, but you didn't. But the point you raised about funding, for example, we had a meeting at the Academic Planning Committee on Monday, and we had a huge discussion about our strategy around our enrollment plan, which is our main source of income, and where we would focus ourselves in terms of the next 5 years. That is a strategic discussion. If you have that discussion in the absence of understanding our 2030 vision, we're losing the plot. So there were a number of things, Ms. Ilbrey, that we speak about on a daily basis that actually brings to the fore the things that you're talking about, the kind of scenarios. The one such one is the challenge we face at this university and, of course, many universities in the country, is the point you'd speak about minding the gap. And more we commit ourselves as staff and as people at CPUT is to be able to understand our students and know where they come from. Because we feel that it is in that understanding that we will be able to then turn them into the gems we would want them. It is the very same students that you pointed out earlier on that is coming from the basic education that launched 3 satellites over the last 2 years. So the point is that the things that we do on a daily basis, the things that we have discussions on, is highly strategic in nature. It just requires us to be able to say to ourselves what it is that where it is that we want to go, what it is that I'm doing now that's going to influence how I get there. And I think we do that on a daily basis. The Vice-Chancellor reminds us of that constantly, just about our journey. So colleagues, I want to say congratulations. It's been really great discussion. Well done. And I think that is certainly in order. And I want to say that we've come to the end of our formal proceedings. And I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you for being part of this great event and making it special for the university and special for our vision. The university's vision of oneness and smartness is certainly firmly rooted in our plans and actions. It has certainly become part of our speak, and the recognition we receive from our stakeholders by virtue of this distinction spurs our determination to accomplish this. I must commend all those who painstakingly planned this event. Vice-Chancellor, your words continue to inspire us, and we shall endeavor to do our best to bring our students success with smartness and oneness. Thank you to our guest, Ms. Chantal Ilbrey. Your input certainly resonates with our plans and actions, and certainly gave us a lot to think about. Prof. Hayes-Swemmer, the ED in the OVC, in the Office of the Vice-Chancellor, thank you, and thank you very much for the welcome and the introduction and all of the important points you pointed out in your presentation. To our program director, Professor Green, I try to put on a smile like you do, but I just can't get it, but I'm going to get some tips from you. But thank you for so efficiently steering our meeting and at the same time providing opportunity for maximum participation. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to the staff of the Marketing and Communication Department, Infrastructure Development and Facilities Management. Thank you to our dedicated lecturers, our heads of department, our deans of faculty, and the rest of the CPUT staff who have lent their support and continue to work tirelessly to accomplish. In fact, at our HOD's forum, it was really inspiring to listen to our heads of department speak about just the whole spirit of Ubuntu. Thank you to the University Council, the SRC, our trade unions. Mr. Ranyawa was here who very eloquently spoke just now, our community and industry partners, and the university's international partners. Thank you to the health compliance officers, the university's health cluster, and the Health Command Center for working tirelessly on keeping our campuses safe. Now, before I conclude in true CPUT style, in true CPUT fashion, I want to thank Gear House and Gourmet to Go, our caterers. I'd like to call the Vice-Chancellor forward. I know he has one last word to say to us. So let me call him forward before I say goodbye to you. Vice-Chancellor.
I don't know what is it that I have to say, Professor Balkar. Come again? Okay. Okay. That I know. I was thinking that I was going to do that after Professor Balkar. Colleagues, I think what I'm actually instructed to do, and which I oblige as a servant, is that please stay behind for a couple of minutes, I think 10 minutes or so. There is a very small clip that we wanted to show you, which of course is actually the highlight of the entire engagement today. And then please, thereafter, please join us in a very light lunch in the lobby hereafter. Thank you very much. It's a supper. It's a supper. Please join us at an early supper. So please join us, colleagues. We'll appreciate that so much. Thank you very much.
Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana
Thank you. That was certainly great. Let's give all the people that were organizing this a huge round of applause. Thank you. That was indeed a great surprise, Vice Chancellor. Thank you very much. Colleagues, in true CPUT style, I would like to say bye danki. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Nkosi siyabulela. Please enjoy your dinner. Thank you.